Hello, and welcome to Your Vote Counts. I'm Bernadine Anderson from the League of Women Voters, bringing you this public, nonpartisan voter service information. These 2020 general election interviews are made possible through Capital Community Media via remote technology and in collaboration with the various leagues of women voters of Oregon and Marion Polk counties. For this race, all candidates were invited, and candidates did not receive the questions that were developed by the League of Women Voters, American Association of University Women, and neighborhood associations ahead of time. The candidates were asked to prepare a 3-minute statement telling about themselves, their qualifications, and their vision for the office if elected. Today, we have the opportunity to speak with candidate Kurt Schrader, who's running for the office of U.S. Congressional 5th District. And we're going to ask him if he will now share his opening remarks. Mr. Schrader?
Thank you, Bernadine. I'm Congressman Kurt Schrader. Had this position for the past 12 years. I served in the state legislature. Before that, I live in Canby, Oregon. I raised my family there. Been there, I think, almost 40 years now. I have a small farm. We did organic fruits and vegetables and a CSA, and also practicing veterinarian, companion animals for 33, 34 years. So a lot of real life experience, both family-wise and business-wise. I think that's an important piece of what your congressperson should be all about, have that sort of background. We've been, frankly, a very good representative for this very diverse district. Our district includes Clackamas, Marion, Polk, Tillamook, and Lincoln counties, a little bit of Benton, a little bit of Multnomah. And it's a very diverse district geographically, socioeconomically, the types of work people do, natural resource industries, and commuters going to Intel, for goodness sakes. So my background, I think, suits me in the district. We've delivered time and again, got the NOAA fleet to move down to Newport from Seattle, huge win for that community out there. Clackamas County, we've made I-205 a highway of national significance. Marion County worked on interchanges and opportunities for development in Mill Creek, and we now have the Amazon complex down there. A lot of the work we do is for our constituents. We've passed a bill that helps folks access Medicare coverage through COBRA. We passed two bills, one for veterans, one dealing with homes, one dealing with for the foreclosure of homes, one dealing with making sure you get your full benefits at the end of the day. Those came directly from constituents. And just the last Congress who worked on the problem we have at Willamette Falls and Bonneville, where those sea lions are eating all the salmon. We created all this great habitat, trying to do the right things, get our fish to come back, work closely with the agencies because of potential extinction there. And then on the national front, we've been a leader in the healthcare arena. We are strong backers of the Affordable Care Act, extending healthcare for millions, making sure prescription drugs are affordable. We've worked hard in that arena. We've worked hard in the natural resource arena, trying to bolster our forestry and ag industries that are under a lot of stress. These trade agreements, the wildfires have caused a lot of problems for these industries. We've also been, frankly, leader in making sure that our schools have the tools they need. And it's not always about a 4-year college education. Career and technical education is becoming more and more popular. It's a easier, less expensive way for many folks to earn a family wage job. We've been leaders in that discussion from my time in the legislature till now. Look forward to getting your vote.
Thank you very much. We're going to share some questions with you, and some of them you've touched on in your opening remarks, so we'll ask you to expand a bit on those as you hear the question. The first one refers to an article that was in the paper about a statement you made from the Energy and Commerce meeting. You stated that it would be a miscalculation for Americans not to return to work and school. Therefore, what conditions should be met in order for people to return to school, work, and other activities?
Well, Oregon's done a lot of that already. I give the governor some credit. The wearing the mask policy has been a huge success. When we started opening up after the initial closure because of concerns about COVID, we didn't know very much. We actually were able to wear the mask policy, and our infection rates have gone down relatively over the last 6 to 8 weeks. And more importantly, the hospitalizations have gone down. That's the metric I think all Oregonians should be watching for. What is the hospitalization rate? That indicates the severity of the disease. We're all obviously somewhat susceptible, but it is the vulnerable Oregonians, seniors, people with underlying health conditions that we really need to protect. So I'm not so worried about the children going back to school, as long as there's some math, that we do the mask policy, there's adequate PPE for these folks. I think we should go back to school. I'm very worried about disparities in education with those that have internet connection, those that have functional families, and those that do not. So I think we're in a good spot because of the work we've already done. Time to get our kids back in school and make sure they get a great education.
Thank you. This is sort of related to question one. I'd like at the federal level, could you tell us any progress on another bicameral, bipartisan COVID aid package that could support state and local governments?
Well, my problem solvers group came out with exactly that package last week. Leadership seems stymied. They were focusing, unfortunately, on the election, not the American people. This problem solvers group that I started 8 years ago now has 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans. We meet regularly, weekly, discuss issues, and we decided with leadership having trouble getting a package together, maybe we could lead the way and give them an idea of what would be a package that could get both Republican and Democrat support. So we put together a package that includes more PPP programs for our business folks, unemployment compensation for folks that have been laid off, testing procedures, making sure that liability protections are in place, making sure the elections can be done in a fair manner, that the different states have their resources out there. The ag groups get assistance. We promote broadband to the point I made a moment ago. We make sure that K-12 gets adequate reimbursement for all the stuff they have to do right now. Higher education also, and we push childcare. Can't go back to work unless you get childcare. And then, of course, state and local aid, huge piece of the puzzle. We use some money that's currently out there from the first CARES package. We put $500 billion into state and local aid because our state and local governments have fronted the cost of the COVID epidemic. And we also have money in there for revenue shortfalls. That was not part of the original CARES package. And a lot of our states and our local governments have had to put out a bunch of money. The wildfires have only aggravated that. So our package has $1.5 billion, Republican and Democrat support. We're asking leadership to push it across the finish line.
Thank you. A couple of times you've mentioned about voting, so I'm going to ask you, do you support federal requirements for voting by mail? And if so, what are your suggestions?
Well, I think it should be an option for every single state out there. It is becoming wildly popular. As you can tell from news media, more and more states, more and more people around the country want to follow Oregon's lead and vote by mail. It is the safest and most secure way to go. Certain people say that's not true, but he is wrong. We've proven it here in Oregon. You have to match up the signature, no ability virtually to do fraud. The vote counters that look at that. But there's cameras as the votes are being tallied by our workers at the election offices. And you can't hack a paper ballot. You can't hack a paper ballot. So if you're worried about security and you want to make sure your vote counts, this is exactly the way to go. And so we're promoting that big time as part of a bill we passed, H.R. 1, at the beginning of this Congress.
Thank you. It is quite an experience to get to work during the elections. I know what you mean. Our next question, changing approach just a little bit. There's many facets to climate change, climate justice. What are your top concerns and what are your top recommendations?
Well, that we come up with a bipartisan approach to climate change. More and more of my Republican colleagues in Congress now are willing to admit, yes, climate change is very real. I serve on the committee that deals with climate change called Energy and Commerce Committee, does healthcare, commerce, and all the different policies we're talking about. And they are, my Republican colleagues are, yeah, climate change is real, but they don't necessarily adopt a Democrat-only approach. They want to make sure that their constituents in middle of this country, down in the Gulf of Mexico, where fossil fuels dominate their economy, are part of the discussion. And I've actually co-sponsored a bill now with Representative David McKinley. He comes from coal country, West Virginia. He's a Republican. And we saw this back and forth. You have one administration doesn't want to do anything on climate change. The next administration has all these different initiatives, and it whipsaws the industries and the citizens that are affected with what are we doing? Which way do we go? So our bill would actually be a bipartisan bill, and it would mandate that power plants in this country, no matter what state they're in, are mandated to get to near zero emissions by 2050, much like what we're doing here in Oregon, frankly. And I've got Republican support for this. It actually leads into a discussion about innovation. Let's develop the technologies, for battery storage, for better solar panels, carbon sequestration, quite frankly. I think that's a real opportunity for us at some point in time that doesn't threaten those folks in states that are unfortunately dependent on fossil fuels, not like Oregon. So David and I work together on this. We've got environmental support. We've got industry support. We're just now putting our legislative text together and going to be running it out here at the end of this year and hopefully be taken up by Congress next session.
Thank you. That's appreciated. Let's go big again. What steps do you see Congress taking to address our relationship with the United Nations? Do you have particular approaches here?
We need to stay engaged, whether it's the Paris Accords on climate change, whether it's being partners in the UN. You can't affect policy by taking your marbles and going home. We actually have to be participants in these international organizations if we want our voice heard, if we want to help influence the discussion. Current administration, I don't think quite gets that, which is unfortunate. But we want to make sure that we're part of that discussion. We can lead a discussion that is good for the American people and, frankly, good for the world. The UN has been a stalwart organization over the years. I think we'd be very remiss to not be participants. I do agree, however, that every nation should be paying its fair share, whether it's UN dues, NATO dues, whatever. The American people shouldn't have to carry the full freight of these organizations. We're a long ways past World War II. A lot of other countries have grown. China, Russia, other countries have now, India, have now become not developing, but developed countries and should pay more of their fair share.
Thank you. You've mentioned a couple of different times about healthcare. So let's take a look at that one. Adequate and accessible healthcare remains an issue to much of the public. In what ways do you think our healthcare system could be improved?
Well, I was here when I first came to Congress and we passed the Affordable Care Act. That was monumental. We forget 10, 12 years later what a sea change and novel idea that was, that everyone should have access to affordable health care. Some states did not pick up on some of the critical elements, like the Medicaid expansion for low-income folks. And as a result, those states have a higher uninsured rate. We could have probably 2 to 3 million more Americans getting health care. The Affordable Care Act increased the opportunity for 20 million Americans to actually access health care. But because of some of the political rhetoric around it, completely unfounded, it saved us money, it provided access, it got rid of pre-existing condition issues. We had trouble with the Republicans getting this thing across the finish line. We did so, and it was a partisan vote, and that's unfortunate. Since that time, certain problems have come up that actually have bipartisan support. I listened to the Republicans in my Energy and Commerce Committee when they were trying and failed to pass, their alternative, or actually it wasn't an alternative, it was just to defund the Affordable Care Act. But I listened to some of the stuff they talked about and that could be used to help fix the Affordable Care Act, make it more affordable for everybody. A lot of folks in the middle income area get squeezed out. The subsidies aren't quite enough, or they're not eligible for the subsidies. So we need to expand that opportunity there. We need to make sure that we have a reinsurance option. We have a big high risk pool so that everyone shares in that risk and not just a few people. That's what drives up the cost of these plans in some of these locations. Oregon has done a great job. Oregon's done a great job. We have a very robust insurance marketplace. Folks have an opportunity to do these things. Oregon has actually done the reinsurance piece, and it has driven our kept premiums from increasing probably 10 to 20%. So I think if we give states more flexibility, we allow the reinsurance to do a better job with the cost sharing, we can make sure that almost every American has access to health care.
Thank you. Since it is an election year, let's ask an election question. How do you feel about campaign finance reform?
100% for it. Oregon desperately needs it. My first election in the state legislature, there were $100 minimums or maximums that you could spend. That might have been a little too tight. And unfortunately, our Supreme Court threw the whole thing out. I've worked in the state legislature with Republican colleagues of mine to have a realistic limit of contributions and expenditures that did not restrict free speech and allowed you to get your message out, but also didn't allow one or two groups to buy the election. I'd love to do that at the federal level. I have supported an amendment every single Congress to repeal or effectively repeal the Supreme Court decision with Citizens United that basically said money equals free speech. I think that's a travesty. In our congressional districts, you spend a couple $1 million in a campaign. For a billionaire, that is nothing. They come in and they try and buy these campaigns, buy these elections. That should not be allowed.
Thank you. And our last question, it's gone very fast here, but our last question is, among the many federal issues you face, which one or ones do you think most affects Oregon?
Well, I think that the climate change one affects Oregon big time. We're seeing it play out in the wildfire issue. I've been in Oregon my whole adult life, and I've never seen things happen like they did this summer. The catastrophes around the country get bigger, stronger, more unmanageable, and I think that's a direct result of that. So we need to get into the woods and work more productively. I've sponsored legislation and passed legislation to establish a wildfire disaster fund. Believe it or not, folks, you could get disaster funding for floods and hurricanes. You couldn't get it for wildfire. I work with Senator Wyden in that effort. I passed a bill on vegetative management where we're supposed to be making sure that the power lines are clear, that the trees and vegetation is not in the way of these power lines. We just now are getting to implement that. And we saw by not having that opportunity how many power lines down in California and right here in Oregon went down. So that working with the natural resource industries have a direct impact on how Oregonians live their life and actually can hopefully survive as more wildfires come into the future. The last piece I would mention in that same vein is the sea lion bill. I mentioned that in my opening remarks. This is an extremely important piece of legislation. I work with Jamie Herrera Butler, Republican across the river in Washington State, to make sure that our fish were not going to go extinct. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife said if we didn't do something in the last Congress, that the winter steelhead and Chinook would actually go extinct in the next few years. I worked hard to talk to my colleagues in Mississippi about our fish problem in the Northwest, and we were able to convince them and people across the country, Northeast, West, Midwest, how important a piece of legislation this was. Every member of our delegation, everyone from the Northwest really got behind it at the end. Good piece of legislation to prevent those sea lions from eating those salmon, camping out at the fish ladders for their salmon buffet. And as a result, it's a brighter future for our salmon in our state.
Thank you. Thank you, candidate Schrader, for our interviews today and for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you. Appreciate it very, very much. Please visit our website at kirkschrader.com.
Thanks also to Capital Community Media for their time and expertise in creating this program and making it available across the state through YouTube and vote 411. Thank you also to the several leagues of women voters, AAUW, Salem City Club for being both interviewers and suggesting questions. And thanks to you, the public, for watching your vote count in order to become a more informed voter. For more voter information, including dates, registration, candidates for state and local areas, and ballot measure information, please go online and visit vote411.org. You have until October 13th to register to vote or make address changes. Ballots begin to be mailed out on October 14th, and that very special day, Election Day, is November 3rd. Please remember that postmarks don't count. Elections matter, and they make a difference in our lives. So remember to vote and encourage others to vote, because your vote counts.